prefer to live stream the meeting. And I believe we are live. Hi guys, and welcome back to Brain-Friendly Thinking. Actually, let me change the view so that people can see us side by side. Today is, I will start a new experiment here on this channel. As you can see, I'm not alone. I'm joined by Karthik, who is a viewer of this channel and who approached me. Since people don't know you yet, Karthik, do you quickly would like to introduce yourself? And then we talk about what we want to do together.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, so I found your channel a few years back, and was really interested in some of the thinking tools that you were talking about. My background is as a consultant and as a researcher, especially interested in soft operations research. There's a whole space in there about visual thinking and how it's useful in kind of organizational consultancy projects. And I think we'll probably talk about more about the background and so on. We should use some of the tools to talk through that. But right now, I think there's a really interesting space around visual thinking, visual tools, and how they can help us both personally and professionally develop and construct thinking that is kind of robust and works over the long term.
Hey, yes, thanks. And as we were talking or speaking together for the last couple of weeks, we actually noticed that we have a number of shared interests, especially when it comes to thinking, gradually constructing new solutions, new ideas. And we were also talking about that there isn't really any great comprehensive book about thinking tools. Let me put it that way. There are a couple of good books, but they usually are more narrow in focus. And this is something that also several of my other viewers have asked me about in the comments, whether I know any good books about thinking tool, about thinking. And no, I don't really. There are a few in German, but they are not translated to English. A few by Birkenbiel, but yeah, she's very hard to translate because of the way she writes. She writes very well. She uses a lot of metaphors, and the metaphors don't translate very well, and a lot of puns. So technically, you would, even if you translate her, you really need to rewrite the book from the ground up. So what we thought we should do is, why don't we, rather than translating something, if technically we have to rewrite it anyway, why don't we start from scratch and write a book ourselves? And it is, it's currently in the making. Well, when I say it's in the making, today is really, well, we have a couple of ideas. We talked about that behind the scenes, but today really marks the beginning of us working on this book. And the idea we had was that we want to focus really on the tools and on the type of problems that you can solve with those tools. And I think Karthik, you had a book in mind that did something similar. Not quite about thinking tools, but you mentioned you read a book that gave you the idea of structuring it in that particular way.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few types of books that I'm kind of drawing on, but in general, it's the ideas of compendiums of techniques. So, for example, in the systems thinking field, recently, one of the academics, one of the people I was talking to, has come out with a book on systems thinking methods, which is a collection of about 60 odd methods that could be quite useful to kind of look at those sorts of tools. More widely, you'll see management tools. So again, there are things out there that cover various types of approaches a management consultant might use in their practice. There's also quite a good book that I found a while back that had to do a little bit with thinking tool. It was more about quantitative decision making. So it was like decision making methods set out in a small book. Um, But I think again we have a situation here where you you kind of have management methods. They quite often try and turn things into formulae. You've got quantitative techniques that are really about trying to optimize a situation through a mathematical function type approach. But you don't really have something which helps you think through situations that are complex and new. And I think when it comes to the whole space of thinking, it's so vast because it's from kind of personal thinking, trying to understand and learn something in detail, through to collaborative thinking and trying to understand things together. So I think where we were talking about again again a compendium sort of idea, but a collection of tools that we have used in the past, ones that we discover. Hopefully, some of the audience can tell us about and we can learn about.
Mm.
But a book itself, it might can list a method, can show it to you, but it doesn't show it to you in practice. And I think one of the things I liked about your channel, Martin, was you took the time to go through a tool and test it in practice, actually try it out and see what was good or bad, and how it helped.
Mm.
For example, I remember seeing one of the videos about, okay, I've done this, and I recall the material from a while later. So I think that's the kind of thing that we'd like to play with in this particular on the kind of on the episodes and with the book, which is test these things out in practice for real and show that these are useful tools for us to learn and share.
Yeah, the thing is, one of the things you just mentioned is that it's just so vast. There are these thinking tools. Usually on YouTube, or the advice is to niche down, do something for students, do something for entrepreneurs, do something for researchers. I don't know. There are lots of different applications, but I'm using them in quite a wide variety of contexts. Um, I used them when I was still an engineer. I used them when I did my PhD. I started using them when I studied for my BEng and MSc. Um, and so I don't really would like to use them to exclude all the others, but at the same time, they're so vast that sometimes maybe if you see one example, you think, okay, this example is not useful for me, so therefore the tool is not useful. Um, so yeah, and what was I going to say? But yeah, so I think that it's very important that you sort of see different types of solutions that you can do with these tools and not just talk through them theoretically. And that's something you mentioned. And I think we briefly discussed the type of um, structure of the individual chapters. I think we agreed that we would like to make them sort of tool focused, one chapter, one tool. There's something from the Broken Wheel books which I really like, which we might want to copy, is that essentially the table of contents is an ABC list. So all of the tools they are listed in alphabetical order because there's really not any one tool is not more general than the other necessarily or better than the other. It all depends on the context. So you can even think of the table of contents as an ABC list of tools, and then within each chapter, um, I think we mentioned we wanted to start from some concrete problem that you might be able to use this tool for. I can't remember how much we actually talked about this because after our last discussion 2 weeks ago, I kept thinking on my own, and some of the things is what we discussed, some are my own thoughts. Um, but yeah, it seems very at the moment it seems very sensible to me. Maybe that will change as we work through it. But at the moment it seems very sensible to start with a problem, introduce the tool, and then introduce further problems you can solve with the tool and not really go to the next tool because you can read it in any order, but sort of um, yeah, have a not really a tight compartment, but a cohesive compartment maybe is the best word.
Absolutely. I think we can, you know, provide an example right now, almost the kind of thing we're talking about. I can probably share my screen and just
Yeah,
answer.
sure.
That's a
I
question you had
think you should already have
initially.
the rights.
So let me just bring my screen up. So hopefully that should be working. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, I can.
Perfect. So, for example, this question of, well, we're talking to each other and we're trying to think about, well, okay, how do we maybe structure the book or think about the tools or think about this particular table of contents type idea? And you mentioned one particular thing, which is an ABC list. So one of the tools, there's a family of tools that I come across called thinking maps, and they're not very well known kind of academically, but they're used quite heavily in the US in an education section. There's a book out there called Thinking Maps by David Hiley. Um, and the thinking maps are sort of 7 or 8 primitives that David Hiley argues, are kind of foundations of thinking. So, for example, one of them is a bubble map. It's a bit like this, and you kind of just go and figure out how you might do things. Um, Very simple tool, but the way we'd apply it is think of, okay, how could we organize our table of contents in this book? And one of the ideas could be it's an ABC list. And now straight away we're saying, okay, that's one of the ideas, but there are probably more ways of doing it. So we can go through and just use this particular tool as a
Hmm.
way to list out other possible structures, in a
We
very
could
kind
do
of
a bubble chart,
straightforward
for
way.
instance.
Sorry,
We
repeat that.
could do a bubble chart because now that I see this, this is of course also a way to organize the content.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Um,
but go ahead, sorry.
yeah. So, for example, I think there's there might be a logical kind of section type
Hmm.
structure that you can use. So some books might kind of go, for example, maybe these are kind of individual tools. These are kind of group tools. So two large chapters, individual and group, for example. And then groups sometimes form 2 types, your small group and large group um, structures. So I come across those situations quite often where I'm trying to do my own individual thinking, and so
Hmm.
there's approaches there. But then when I'm doing consultancy work, typically it's small group consultancy, and I use certain techniques for that. But then large groups are different. You can't, you might need to teach them a technique and have them go and do stuff. So maybe a section structure there could be interesting. I suppose there's also, another approach we could use around perhaps the how well known these tools are. Maybe there's something like that around, there's a criteria from um, well known to less well known. I'm not sure how good an idea that is, but again, it's just, it's like, in practice, the idea,
Hmm.
okay, we can keep talking around this and see, so we don't get locked into our first thoughts necessarily. We have the ability to capture and think through some of these ideas.
Yeah, I think this is very crucial. As I mentioned at the beginning, we haven't really started working on this book. We've thrown around some ideas, but it's currently really still open. And it is something that we want to, first of all, we want to explore. You and me, we want to explore together during those live streams. But it's also something we want to um, discuss and be shaped by you, by the viewers. And essentially, if you have any questions, either during the live streams or later when you watch the video, you have any ideas, or maybe you have some requests where you say this would be very useful, then please don't hesitate to tell us. And ideally, as the live streams continue and as hopefully more and more people are watching, we might also have some discussions not only between the two of us, but also with the chat and have some more lively interactions there. Because this is really, um, yeah, as you mentioned, it's part of part of writing the book is really thinking through it, what is best, and um, we can use the thinking tools to actually to help us think through this. So it gets a bit meta. We're writing a book about thinking tools by using the thinking tools to help us write the book. But yeah, I guess usually unless you start writing, you don't, and anything, whether it's an essay or a report or a book, you don't notice how much thinking goes into writing, which is, I guess, why it's also so difficult and why so many people struggle with expressing them clearly, because usually that means they haven't thought through what they want to say enough to say it clearly, to say it straightforwardly.
And I mean, I think that just on that particular point, it's so hard to just write something perfectly the first time. You have to actually articulate that. And it's a process of writing and talking about something that helps you understand what you're trying to think in the first place.
Mm,
Now, we can't always have somebody available to talk to. You can't always have somebody, I mean, these days, perhaps an AI kind of tool will help a little bit with that thinking, but I think there are some, we'll talk about that as well, because there are some
mm,
pros and cons to that approach. But sometimes a tool on a piece of paper is a bit like that thinking partner, where you're able to kind of work with it and say, okay, I have starting point. How do I even start thinking? Well, you could use a list structure. The circle, the bubble diagram type thing is a list. There are other kinds of lists. ABCs are a list. So the question you're trying to ask yourself is, how do I reason through this thing? Well, these tools are like thinking partners, not just thinking tools, and you can start to work with them. Which is why in in my own practice, over time, as I've used some of these tools, you can see the huge benefits. When I discovered ABC lists through kind of your videos, Martin, I hadn't seen them before really in kind of the English literature. Nobody referred to them. You said they kind of come from a German literature background. So one of the first things I tried was using them to brainstorm. So, start with a blank sheet of paper, brainstorming, you just put some ideas down, you try and think through some concepts. And then you can use the ABC list as a way to brainstorm. Suddenly, I had nearly twice the number of ideas because those is the anchoring thing. The words sparked something else in your thinking. So you see
mm,
this huge boost in the activity by using one of these tools to kind of take you down this route. So it's really kind of interesting. I think again, some of these come through practice, and today, because of the technologies we have, because of the way things work, it's kind of quite easy to think you don't need to think. The systems will do it for you, AI will do it for you, something else will do it for you. But the real kind of protections we have are really our ability to think, I think now.
mm. Yeah, and especially today, we're faced with so many problems, be it personal problems or really wide-ranging problems. Um, we really need to think. And yeah, there's one thing I wanted to mention, because you mentioned the ABC lists. So they are technically not in the wider German literature as such. They really come from Vera of Birkenbiel. Um, and it's funny because she's sort of credits the, well, she doesn't really credit the Americans, but she says, so she's German, but she lived in the US for a couple of years. She studied there psychology and journalism. I don't know which of them was major, which one was minor, but it was like in the 60s, and then she returned to Germany. And apparently, according to what she writes in her books and talked about in her seminars, uh, at least back then, in America, it was much more common to make lists as opposed to the German educational system. And sometimes probably also alphabetical, but they weren't using ABC lists, alphabetical lists as such. But somehow over time, she got the idea of, well, if I already do a list, why don't I use the ABC? And you mentioned that using an ABC list gives you more ideas. And we talked about this before, well, before our first live stream. This is something called the crossword puzzle effect. That if you ask for a bird with H, for instance, you're more likely to think of something and think of something unusual than if you just say a bird. So this is why the crossword puzzle effect. Um, I also think that how Birkenbiel came up with the ABC list shows something quite important, in that it is very often when we think about we want to solve a problem or we want to get a new idea, we want to discover something new, we think of, or there must be this one eureka moment, and then you essentially know the answer, and the rest is straight sailing. But very often things really sometimes can take years, uh, and sometimes can even need several people to work through it, not only as a group, but I can work individually, you can work individually, a third person, you read what I write, the third person reads what you write about that, and sort of like it's gradually building. And I think this was also one of the ideas which we really wanted to express with the book, that it's not just, oh, here's one problem or here's one task, which is the one specific best thinking tool for that, but that very often we need to use a combination of thinking tools. We need to use the same tool several times, and we really, rather than trying to chase this eureka moment, really we want to gradually build layer by layer, so to speak, the solution, because this is, well, at least in my opinion, it might differ by field, but at least in my experience, I should say, not only opinion, this is how most of my ideas, whether they are solutions or whether there are frameworks that I'm working on. For some of them, I've been working on for like 20 years by now, and it's really every now and again you read something or you get an idea, and in a very short amount of time, everything seems to be transformed. I guess that's where the eureka moment or the idea, the myth of the eureka moment comes from. But really, if I hadn't done the years before of slowly building it, I would have never gotten to the point of where suddenly everything falls into place and seems to make sense. And I think we also talked about that um, we want to ideally, we will see whether we will succeed or not, but we would like to include a section in the book that helps people to choose the right kind of tools for the problems, and say, if you need to brainstorm, if you need new ideas, then maybe ABC list is a good idea, and potentially Carver. There are others, of course, as well. Maybe a classical mind map or whatever. But if maybe the structure is the problem. You already have a lot of ideas, or you have a lot of items, you have a lot of concepts, but they're all sort of falling together. Then an ABC list might not be the right tool, because it doesn't provide you with structure. In fact, it provides you with the opposite of structure. Everything is, Birkenbiel sometimes used to call ABC lists democratic lists, because there isn't a hierarchy. Each letter, even though they come in a specific sequence, the sequence isn't built on any inherent A isn't better than B, or B isn't better than A in any meaningful way. So that's why she called them democratic lists, and that means if you want structure, then a something democratic is not what you want. You want to create hierarchies or rankings. You want to create you want to group things together, and so on and so forth, and compare and contrast between them.
Yeah, I think that's kind of so there's a couple of points there actually, which I think I kind of and I need to remember as well, which as we go through this. Initially, I did think of it as being kind of almost like um, bipolar, as in you have eureka moment or you have the gradual construction. But I think you're absolutely right. Eureka is the culmination of the all the work that came previously. So there's a saying about, it only took me 10 years to become an overnight success. That's, you see the end result as this flashing kind of thing, but it is the 10 years before that really kind of brings you there in the first place. Um, Part of this as well, so the structure and the ideas thing relates, I think, to some of the literature on memory and cognition and how you remember things. So, my children have just going through exam season right now, so I've been remembering what it's like to study and remember material. And um, at schools, they tell them that when you read something or you look at something, it's in your brain. The problem is retrieval, so it's kind of stored there. But how do you retrieve it? You were trying to improve retrieval practices. And one of the things about retrieval practices is how do you put the information down in the first place? You have, if you put information down in a linear way, it may have a hierarchical structure. So an ABC list arguably has no inherent structure. It's attached to the alphabetical order. So fair enough. There is that idea of a democratic list. Now, if you change the order of those words to follow some sort of narrative, you would now have a hierarchy. You might have a point one has these words, point two has these words. And I think, again, I've seen in some your videos, you sort of do that. You group the words together into themes. And so that thematic grouping is a form of hierarchical structuring. This comes first, that comes next, etc. And then the third bit, which is necessary for kind of retention, is connective discussion. So the hierarchy, the connections between the various points and being able to put them together. One of the issues you have with traditional note taking in a notebook is it's very linear. So you have hierarchy, but you don't have the connections between ideas as easily. And so some of these visual techniques, these kind of thinking tools, I think bring in that idea of being able to connect two different ideas so you can start to create a network effectively of concepts, which again helps us with retention and learning these things more deeply.
Yeah, I think there is one little caveat that is worth mentioning because at least from the literature that I'm aware of, the not the deep the research papers, but the not necessarily popular science literature, but the literature also for educators that summarizes the tools, in this case, the teaching tools, the learning tools that are out there, is that the idea that one specific representation is the best for learning. Like Tony Buzan, he always emphasizes, oh, you must not use a linear organization at all because that's bad for the brain. That's why he developed his mind maps, and he said this is the one thinking tool that beats them all. And there's another thing called a concept map, which is funny enough also used in AI a lot. But essentially, you have your individual concepts, you connect them together. Actually, I should be able to share my screen. Just a moment. Up. So if I share my screen, yep, then cool. Then I can also draw something. So you essentially have something um, like let's start with writing. I hope this is big enough. So you have writing, this is one concept. You have, yeah, if I write like, sorry, let me write thinking up here. Thinking, that's another concept, and they are related. You can say is a form of, I think I got this wrong. I used to use this technique in the past, but it's been a couple of years since I last used it. I think you always go from top to bottom, so I wrote it in the wrong way. Now it reads thinking is a form of writing, which doesn't make sense. Writing is a form of thinking, so I should switch them around. But this is essentially a very simple, concept map, and then you can have.
I think you can add arrows potentially for the direction as well. So
You could
yeah,
use, yes, the way that I first was introduced to it doesn't have arrows, but you're right, that using arrows is actually much better. Uh, so although I am currently hesitating because I don't know which writing uses paper, so you would draw the arrow that way. And with that, you can draw this concept map. And so there's, I think the concept map was invented by a person called Novak,
yeah,
if I remember that correctly.
that's right. I
Uh,
think Novak was
yeah, and
the
I read a book by him 10, 11 years ago now. I forget what it's called, but yeah, this is one of the tools that he introduces, and in the book he's like, oh yeah, you have to do it that way. And I found in a lot of website for educators, for teachers, they also say, oh yeah, if you have your students create concept maps, then they will remember much better and this and that. But the real point is, if you want to remember something, if you want to store it, you really have to construct that knowledge in your brain. And what you need to do for that is think through it. And really, so that's why I always say there isn't really a difference between thinking and learning, or thinking and research. And a concept map can be a very good tool to think through it. But an ABC list, a categorization, a mind map, all of them can be good tools. And if you use several of them, then you can construct the knowledge much better. Then, of course, you have retrieval practice to, which also helps to consolidate the knowledge and all of that. But as always, it's not this one tool that beats them all. It is a combination of tools. Some tools might be better for certain jobs than others, or maybe let's say instead of some tools, some family of tools might be better. And that goes back to what you mentioned before, that we can group the tools. Uh, you had a grouping of individual and small group, large groups. We can group them by, do we make a list? Is it a graphical tool? Does it use writing? Journaling would, for instance, also be a tool. We can group them by the types of problems that you can solve with those tools. And I don't really know whether we are able to capture all of that in one book. I think this is probably needs several books to really work through it, to really expound it and so on, um, which is quite nice. Certain books might be a bit more, where I don't want to use the term theoretical, because theoretical has such a negative connotation. But really, there is a quote by, I forgot who, that says nothing is as practical as a good theory. And I think the reason behind that is that a good theory is really a framework, again, that helps you to navigate certain things. So I could imagine that there's one book like the one we're planning right now, which is more practical, where we can only touch on certain things, and then maybe there might be another book waiting that is more theoretical in that it gives you more of a framework. It doesn't give you the tool so much, but it gives you a or several frameworks to help you choose the tool for the jobs, or the tools for the jobs. And if you're stuck, you can use that knowledge to think what might be next.
Yeah, I think that there's so many points there which we have to kind of keep in mind. So, for example, this idea of constructing, I think that makes perfect sense. You can construct knowledge in different ways, and so some of those things are going to be one of the things that I learned when I did my MBA was the idea of, you know, you tend to start life by thinking there is a perfect way. If I just find this perfect approach, everything will work for me. And then as you kind of get older and you start doing real practice, you learn this word called contingent, and they use that all the time. Things are contingent on the situation. It depends on the thing you're actually in. There isn't just a perfect tool that's going to do that. So quite often, a tool that someone can use to construct knowledge in a way that works for them might be different from one that somebody else is using. And some people might need visual tools. Some people might need, even sort of auditory tools. Paper tools and drawings aren't for everybody. Some people find them more difficult, and actually they want to talk out their ideas. So we might want to think about some of that as well. We started off with paper as being the default, but I think you and I are both very comfortable on paper, and that's our way of doing things. We should probably consider tools that are non-paper based, conversational tools or recordings and so on, and how that sort of works. Um, the idea of kind of, again, a series of potential things makes sense because it's different levels of how people are going to operate. Um, there's a few kind of approaches here where I think about frameworks. So one of my research areas is operations research or operational research, and in there, you see soft operations research, and a writer called Checkland has put forward what's called the FMA framework. So FMA is a framework, just we talk a framework of tools. A is the area of application, and the M is the method. So typically, it's kind of drawn. If I just bring my screen back up again, it's drawn a bit like this. Find a blank space. Yeah, so you can have a framework of of ideas. So when I think about different sort of the theory behind how we think about how we construct knowledge, the gradual approach, all those things fall into the frame of ideas that work for us. You then have kind of an area of application, and that's going to be different for most people. It might be individual, the group thing. It might be whatever situation you're in. So you've got F and A, and the method is kind of drawn a bit like this as a the approach you take within that situation. I think this is quite a generalizable framework. Um, we sort of use it in my research. I would call this kind of thing action research. You learn by doing. Your essential approach is I've got a real world situation, whether it's a personal one or a company one. I'm going to think about this framework ideas, and I'm going to select a method M to kind of apply in there. Now, one more thing that I think is quite interesting and important is okay, so the methods, they're often created by somebody. So Tony Buzan created mind maps, Novak created concept maps. And then because you've created this method, there is a need, and I found this personally when trying to publish some work on the methods that I've been working on. It's the pressures of publishing require you to draw a neat box around your method. You need to kind of define it and say this is exactly what it is and this is what it isn't. So mind map is a central node with radiating branches, and from each of those things you have more radiation. So that's kind of how a mind map is defined typically in the literature. But what happens if we have a conversation and then actually there isn't just one central node, there's again something else that's actually quite important. And there's something else that's important in here. Now, at this stage, you might end up with sort of multiple maps that are within the main structure. And then you realize, actually, hang on a second, this thing here is connected to this map from one particular way, and that's connected to that. So now your maps start to mix together in a so the original mind map structure is kind of arboreal. It's like a tree. You have a single tree, each thing branches, and you have a tree structure. It also works like that. But what happens when it gets messy? It's probably not the same thing. It's not a mind map as defined by Bazin in his particular literature. But it may be useful to be able to adapt the technique and do something else with that. And maybe then it gets closer to being a concept map. So you have a situation where, for the purposes of publication and intellectual property and ownership, people have to put a nice, neat box around their method. But as someone who is a practitioner looking at these methods, I think we have the freedom to take from them and try and use them as best we can. Within the framework of this, it needs to be structured and research driven. So a very useful word that I've been coming across is bricolage. So people use this as a term to say, actually, we can pick and choose, try these things in action, select from a variety of methods, and have a go. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't ignore the original method, because the whole point is you have a structure and a logic, and somebody's laid out a prescription for how you do it. But I think there is a translation piece where, as you take that method and use it in practice, you may adapt it for your own use. And I think we'll probably show some examples of that as we talk through things. Just like you said, Burtonville, started off with the concept of lists and then added something to it in her own practice. I think that's quite an important part of how we think about, well, the overarching theory may be frameworks and methods applied to an area of application, but the way you do it is maybe the bricolage technique, where you bring things together and use them.
Yes. Um, I think this really helps us to define the purpose of the book better. Because I still think that your idea of the compendium as a first, maybe only a first book, but at least as the first book, makes a lot of sense. Just to bring them not all together. Of course, there are lots of different thinking tools. We might not know all of them and so on, but bring a large part of them together and to help the practitioner to to choose from them. I think this is good because yeah, I mean you experienced that as well, and I also experienced that very often. Um, you need to adapt certain tools to certain tasks or string them together in a way that they were not intended to be strung together. And at the end, for me, it's always the problem you're trying to solve is sort of the centerpiece. It's almost like a mason or other type of artisan. You need to choose the right tool for the job. And I think we're sort of going full circle, but maybe we can not so much write it down, but keep it in mind as a goal that we both agree with, is that we really need this compendium for somebody to easily look it up, but also uh, it needs to be detailed enough that somebody not familiar with the techniques can know how the techniques work and what to apply them from the description. Because one of the problems with a encyclopedia, for instance, is that an encyclopedia is not really that much or that useful as a learning tool. It's very good if you already know a topic and you just very briefly want to recap on something, or if you want to have a general overview just so that you get a first idea. But if you really want to learn something, then it is often too condensed, not enough information, not enough surrounding information, and it's not very useful as a learning compendium. And I think we don't only want to have an encyclopedia, but we really want to have something that somebody who doesn't know what an ABC list is, what a concept map is, or whatever, can go to the respective entry and really get a sort of not only a step-by-step. It's almost like some YouTube videos, like a Veritasium video or so on. Some of the very good educational YouTubers, they have a now they tend to make longer videos because they can't fit everything in a very short video. But you might have like a 20 or 30-minute video, and you learn more than from some other videos which are 2 or 3 hours because they're condensed to the essentials, but they have enough background, they have enough context that you can that it doesn't just boil down to a dry list of things, but afterwards you really have a useful understanding of what of the topic they're talking about. I think this would be very good for forward book chapters. You muted yourself.
Yeah, there are definitely, I think, limitations to what you can put in a book by itself. But one of the experiments I think we're running here is the book's going to be the outcome of maybe, a year or maybe 2 years of conversation. It's not going to be something that comes out immediately, potentially, unless we can go through things fairly quickly. So one of the things that might be interesting, I think we're going to use some of these tools as we think about the book anyway, and we'll explain those tools as we go along. Um, so one option that I've seen, for example, is a website called Nutrition Facts, that uses where a doctor called Michael Greger writes these big fat books about about nutrition, and they've got thousands of references. But within them, he's also sort of put in links in his latest book to the little videos that kind of show you how they work in practice. That might be quite useful as a blended approach because as we talk through things, we'll probably end up with examples of in use, this is how it works. So the compendium can have a little link to that and say, here's the additional resource, you can go and see how it sort of works in practice. Because that visual piece is going to be a lot easier. And I think even with these sessions that we have, obviously, the first session we are kind of doing a lot of talking. We will be having some discussion. But I think our plan is to try and have our screens and the cameras on the content more as we go along, so that we can collect these examples of using the tools in practice. Some of them we're very familiar with, some we might not know at all. And learn them as we go through the process.
Yes, I think that's a very important point. The live streams, they are already publications in a way. And ideally they are useful for people, um, and not just because they can be shaping the book, but just by themselves, just by us talking through it. As you mentioned, that's they're useful. Also, of course, I have the YouTube channel, but one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, you also have a blog, and I think we will put a link to your blog in the video description after we finish the live stream, and we can uh, maybe as we're talking through it, we get other ideas for not things that we want to do on live stream, but maybe that I will create a more traditional video about, or you might create a blog post about, or they might be cross-referencing reference each other, and so on and so forth. So it's really ideally more like a fountain of outputs that we have.
Yeah, I think that's probably, again, quite an interesting thing for listeners to think about, which is what's the combination of resources and capabilities that you have to use to kind of understand and disseminate output. So, for example, already, if you know people are watching this particular video, they'll know that I quite like digital drawing. I use that quite a lot. My blog, it came out of really in 2017. I started writing. Well, I wanted to learn to write first of all. That was my intention. I wanted to learn to think and write more effectively. So I set a goal for myself back in 2017 to write 1 million words in 10 years. I thought, that was a reasonable target. I'd have a go at that. So when I sat down to write a blog post and kind of went, what does a good blog post look like? It's you should have a headline, you should have a thing, and you should have an image, and write your stuff. And I thought to myself, well, where can I get an image from? So I was looking online for various free image sources and so on. And it just so happened that a few years back when I was doing my MBA, I come across sketchnotes as a concept. So Mike Rohde's book on sketchnotes. I use sketchnotes for my own MBA, and I got interested in digital tools for drawing sketchnotes. And I realized a bit again, a bit like where things come together. I have this need to create images for a blog. I have a skill I've been developing for learning purposes around drawing things digitally, and the two came together. I went, well, actually, I can draw pictures and illustrate my own blog in that way. Now, um, earlier this year, I hit my 1 million word target, and I've written several few thousand posts, I think, over that time. But it was really interesting how this concept of being able to draw to think and then write, that in itself has been a practice over time that has led to kind of a learning journey. And I don't think it happened kind of just by you don't sit down and plan this kind of thing. It happens as you go through. And then that leads into, okay, so we have a blog, we can have a way of doing that thing. Some of the stuff that I've been doing with the blog, I'm trying to put into traditional publications, but a normal research-based approach, it takes a long time to get your thoughts clear, go through a peer review process and publish. And you don't have to always do that. Yes, that's a really good form of making sure that the knowledge you create has been reviewed and it's not just something entirely made up, but there is some rigor behind it. But in today's world, paper-based publication is just one of the options we have. So the ability for us to have blogs, have YouTube videos, have live streams, have kind of constructed pieces of content. All of these, I think, are just opportunities for us to engage more deeply with the content. And probably one kind of final thought there is it depends on how we think about, the audience here. But these are fairly long discussions. They're kind of slow discussions. It's not about trying to go very, very quickly and go, here's 30 seconds, and then you just kind of have the next buzz. I don't think we're trying to aim for that because this is a long-term skill. You want to keep your brain active into your 90s. You need to take the time to gradually discuss, construct, understand, store and retrieve information. It's not about here's a very quick video, YouTube video you can just watch straight away. I think it's more about a journey, and eventually it'll be in the book because that's a compendium of that efficiently conveys. I mean, regardless of how much people like video, text is still such a hugely efficient way of conveying final information. You can read a couple of pages in a minute and you've got the gist of it. Now you want to learn the practice, well, maybe this video will help. You want to learn the
Yeah.
thinking, maybe this video will help. You want to see, you want to learn a bit more about how we went through the process, you can listen to all this. But we can choose at what level of engagement they want to go in. But we find this useful as a technique, so we're doing it because in our situation, it's applicable.
Yes. And there's something that's I just thought about when you said that a book is still very good to go deeper. You know that a lot of lecturers, they have, I mean, even traditionally, even like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, you have the lecture and then you have the lecture notes. And these days, a lot of lecturers, they just, obviously they have they have PowerPoint presentations for their lectures. You might like that or you might not like that, but okay. But then a lot of the lecture notes, they are simply screenshots of the PowerPoint slides. And that's something I never liked because I don't know, there's something about properly written lecture notes that's, as you say, you can just go deeper. You can maybe illuminate the concepts you're talking about from a different perspective. And that in itself is valuable for the students. Or of course, you can use a textbook, which is very often a textbook started off with lecture notes and it then got finished up or yeah, edited a little bit and published.
You've hit on something that I kind of react to as well quite strongly. So, I remember one of my first year of undergrad engineering, one of my lecturers, he provided these lecture notes. He'd handwritten all of them. They were kind of beautifully, handwritten, illustrated, and the slides that he used were sort of subset information. So, kind of showed part of it for the discussion, the diagram, and so on, and your lecture notes as part of the kind of the finished piece. And even though I never really used that subject, I kept those notes for probably about 20 years before I decided that I couldn't really do much with them anymore. Just because it was the kind of work that went into them, and I kind of appreciated and just I studied harder for that because of the way in which the content was presented, I think. And then conversely, when I was doing the MBA, one of the lecturers, started the lecture and went, "Oh, I haven't got the PowerPoint slides because they haven't been provided to me by the publisher." And just the fact that A, they didn't have their own material. B, they were just planning on reading what the publisher had already created and using that as content. Just the fact they hadn't put the effort in, turned me off from that particular approach.
Yeah.
And I think that's again part of today's like AI enabled world. It's one of those questions that people need to ask themselves. Just because it can make something faster doesn't necessarily mean adds value, because quite often the value from a user is in what effort went into it.
Mm.
You kind of engage more because you can see the people who kind of work their way through something. And this idea of shortcuts, I think it puts a lot of people off sometimes. Certainly for like, okay, maybe you can create a picture. If something isn't worth doing, I think you can then do it quickly with AI. If it's worth doing, if it's worth taking the time to do it, then it requires this kind of deeper engagement and the gradual constructive approach to have value. So that's probably something again where slow versus fast, quick, expedient versus long-term building. These are all trade-offs people need to make, I think, in their own thinking to decide what's valuable and what's not.
That there are trade-offs, although again they can work together because like a 30-second video about a technique can get you interested in the technique in the first place. And if you then want to go deeper, if you decided that's interesting enough for me to go deeper, as long as you then have the other content available, then I would say that uh, well, I don't want to say that all 30-second videos are worth the time. We now, even without
Well,
AI, we have a lot of slop. We already had a lot of slop developing or growing over the years, even before AI came in, and now we have even more of that because AI is so good at spewing that out. Um, but yeah, that you can make short form content which is very valuable, and you can also make long form content. Sorry, long form content which is not very valuable. And yeah, in the end, it's good. The more of a mix you have, the better it is because you can address different people and the same person at different times might need different content, sometimes short time, sometimes longer, and so on and so forth.
absolutely. I think I think it was Pascal who wrote about, I'm sorry I couldn't write you a short letter. There's a long letter because I can at the time write you a short one. I think creating a 30-second piece of content is actually a lot more effort because you have to take the time to distill the ideas down, and there is certainly value in doing that. And absolutely, long forms. We know that most people aren't going to watch an hour of people talking to each other because that's not necessarily the purpose. And eventually, these ideas will need to be in the 20, 30-second branch for wider applicability or for reach. I think the difficulty is trying to jump to the 30-second output without doing the longer work because then you don't quite know what's happening. So, for example, again, I think it's just one of those situations where I see more and more um, kind of summarized information from AI, but I don't know if the summary is correct. So I still need to go and read the bigger thing to really understand what's happening. So for many of us, we're going to have to do the long work so that we can do the short work better. I don't think it's like there's certain work you can't shortcut. Something has to go into your head at some stage. You know, wherever the content is, however it turns up, you have to take it into your head and process it for you to internalize, understand it. And that's probably kind of our focus with this series, which is there's stuff outside that's happening, and that's fine. But at some stage, how do you understand things more effectively? Well, these are some of the ways in which we can do it. These are some of the tools we have to take material and work with it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We mentioned AI a couple of times. I'm actually been experimenting a lot with how you can use AI for thinking. What I mean by that is not using as a shortcut for thinking, but it's almost like using a prompting AI to prompt you if you like, using AI to well, they can be journaling prompts that you get from AI, but they can also be not really a discussion because there is not another person at the end, but it's also more than a monologue. It's something in between. I'm currently playing with the idea of calling it a 1.5 log or something like that. It's more than if you're just doing it yourself, but it's less than if you're doing it with another person. And that's again, it adds new tool to the toolboxes that can be used quite fruitfully, but don't necessarily. They can also be used to create a lot of false content and misleading content and all of that. Okay, so we are almost at the end of 1 hour. Um, I don't think we have any comments in the comment section for today, unless
And so far,
I don't
no.
see them yet.
I don't think anybody's dropped any questions, but I mean, this has been an introduction,
Yeah.
I suppose, and
So I
yeah.
think that for today I think what was really good that we again clarified what we want to do and that our viewers also got to know you a bit more as a person. And well, we will see how we do this going forward. But my idea is to have sort of a plan, not a very fixed plan, but sort of a plan. Like, for instance, for next time, I could imagine that we might be starting with some ABC list or something similar, maybe something else, maybe some bubble chart or whatever. We can try different things where we start brainstorming problems we faced in the past, problems that our viewers might face, and also start brainstorming thinking tools. And then before we go into the individual thinking tools, maybe try to bring the two together and already have an exploration of what thinking tools could be used for what type of problems. And then we'll see. That's where we start, and we'll see where it goes from there. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the focus is going to be on the tools. I suspect that some people may be interested in how do they do it as well. So a brief discussion about the options may be sensible. I know that your tools are designed primarily for paper, and they translate into the way that I use digital tools fairly effectively. So it might be worth us just kind of showing some examples of how you can. There are some pros and cons. I think paper you get away from the computer and you put some time aside. You really get into flow with kind of what you're doing. Digital has some advantages around infinite sheets, the ability to take a lot of content and mix and match different sort of approaches. So it's quite often people are interested in the tools and stuff that we use. So I think we should probably have a session on, okay, if you want to follow along or do stuff, here's probably the easiest way to get going. And then yeah, tools themselves and the connection between tools, it'll all come through as we use them in practice, I think. But again,
Yeah.
if any listeners have specific situations, and so I think it's really useful to start, having them come to us with any comments or suggestions, because you have that three-part structure. We had the framework ideas about gradual construction, and retrieval. We've got the areas application, which we know about, you and your research, me and my practice and my research. But there are other areas that the listeners, the viewers might be interested in. And then there's a big chunk of methods. We will talk about different methods and how we sort of work with them.
Yes, I think in general we should explore more how we can use different tools like ABC lists. Okay, I can do it on paper. I can do it on the your writing tablet. I could do it in an Excel sheet. Maybe I can even do it by talking. I don't know. So some tools they can be very used with a broad set of technologies and methods. Others with more more narrow one. And I think that will definitely be worth exploring. Yeah, just my idea for the next time is we start with an overview, and then after that we can dive into each of the tools and explore them in detail.
Certainly.
Um, One thing we should mention is when we will meet again next time, and our current planned schedule is do this once a month.
Yeah.
So the next time, or probably every 4 weeks, I should say, that's usually once a month, but in the few months it might be twice. So the next, we now have where are we? Not March. We now have the 24th. So 8th would be in 2 weeks. Then the 22nd of May would be our next live stream.
Maybe worth also us just putting something in the show notes for people to
Yes, yes.
possibly subscribe or just let us know, because if things move around, at least we can then email them and tell them
Yeah.
when things are, or
Yeah, they
follow up.
might move around.
Yeah,
We are busy with our lives, and we can't always make room for that because something else might creep up. Or maybe depending on how it goes, we might find that a different schedule works better.
good experiment.
And yeah, things might be subject to change. But for now, this is the plan. So the 22nd of May would be the next time, and then we see how it goes and how things will develop. So Karthik, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for
It
having
was
me.
great talking to you. And um, for everybody who's watching, thanks for watching. If you found this useful, please consider subscribing. And until next time, keep thinking. Yep. And